Enclave here. Why isn't your video feed working?
These guys are undoubtedly so many players' first main antagonists in a Fallout title. Remnants of the rich and powerful, the military, and the American government. They have the biggest guns around and plan to inherit the world that so rightfully belongs to them. But what's more powerful than the Enclave? Game designers. Let's take a look at some of the arguments and answer. Did Bethesda ruin the Enclave? One of the earliest arguments I have discovered about the Enclave is that they shouldn't have a presence in DC at all, noting that they were entirely destroyed in Fallout 2. However, I could not find any bits of lore that says everyone was stationed at Navarro or the oil rig. In fact, the great and powerful AHS-9, the leader of the Hubologists in San Francisco, states the Enclave are a remnant of the past, a neurodyne that has yet to be aligned. They have hidden bases all over the shards of old California, and their strongest stronghold is off to the west, over the waters. To be fair, that doesn't state that the Enclave has bases outside of California, but it does state that the Enclave was never intended to be limited to Navarro or the oil rig. I thought maybe I had to look outside of Fallout 2, maybe the Fallout Bible, but nope, nothing. I even asked a bunch of guys on the Fallout lore subreddit. Sure, it could be a little hit or miss sometimes, but hey, maybe just having more eyes could help. But no, they didn't turn anything up either. At this point, I can only assume there's nothing there. Maybe the belief stemmed from the ending slides of Fallout 2, because, well, let's be honest, it does sound pretty definite.
After the Enclave's destruction, the refugees of Arroyo and Vault 13 resettled, building a new community with the aid of the Garden of Eden creation kit. Arroyo's elder lived for many years after the destruction of the Enclave. In the years following the destruction of the Enclave, not long after the destruction of the Enclave.
But destroyed things can be reformed. And it wasn't like exploding the oil rig didn't put a dent in them or anything. The Chosen One knocked them out of the game for about 3 decades. Pretty good work for a tribal and his band of buds. And 30 years is plenty of time for survivors to have children and have those children grow up, repopulating some of their numbers. Though likely nothing on the scale that they had prior. Dr. Curling, the main man behind the reverse engineered and deadly FEV strain, and the namesake of FEV Curling 13, actually states that the oil rig had 1,000 people. He says this when you're able to convince him that the planet is immoral, allowing him to release the toxins into the oil rig's ventilation system. It's not pretty. You should leave as soon as possible. I'd rather had the weight of 1,000 on my conscience rather than several 100,000. Our time is through here. We had our chance. To add, while not officially canon, the Fallout Bible even gives rise to the possibility of there being bases across the entire globe. In issue 6, a player asked a couple of questions. Among those were about the dots on the world map in the Enclave's war room. The answer reads this. The dots on the map wall are either Enclave bases, sites of interest for the Enclave, special monitoring stations, or just flashing red dots placed there for ambience. I'm betting on the latter. While it does state that ambience was more than likely the targeted goal, it also gives rise to the possibility of dots being bases. And this dot? Well, it's hard to make out completely. It kind of looks like DC to me. Now, don't be wrong, I'm not saying they intended Raven Rock or whatever to exist, but it gave Bethesda the possibility. They did study the Fallout Bible, according to Todd Howard. There's a defunct blog called Welcome Back to Fallout. Any attempt using Wayback Machine stops you due to the age confirmation, but the Fallout Wiki does have a copy. Todd Howard states, obviously we had the old games to look at, and Fallout 1 became our main model inspiration. I've always preferred the tone of it, and it's the one we focus our time dissecting. We also went through all the original source material as well as the Fallout Bible put together by Chris Avellone, whose work is always fantastic. Chris Avellone. I'm sorry, Chris. All in all, I just don't see the argument being valid. The reason why they couldn't have an East Coast presence, after they worked out 30 years of setbacks and political struggles. Black and white morality is also another argument. Some paint the Enclave and Fallout 3 as just an inhuman boogeyman. Some, however, point to the division between Colonel Autumn and President Eden as being the prime example of gray morality. And I think the latter is a totally fair argument.
Ah, yes, Colonel Autumn, my trusted subordinate. I'm sure you've noticed that Colonel Autumn and I do not see eye to eye these days. Figuratively speaking, of course. The good Colonel and I disagree on how best to approach the problem of the wasteland. He feels my methods are too extreme. He's allowed his humanity to cloud his objectivity. And now that he is publicly countermanding my orders, I can no longer rely on him.
However, given the incredibly limited scope of Eden versus Autumn, and nothing can really come of it, I can see why it's ignored. You can't really help Eden take down Autumn, or vice versa. The only thing you can actually do is dump the FEV into the water supply like you don't want you to. And really only for giggles. I think the argument of the black and white morality stems from Fallout 3 as a whole. Destroy Megaton or save it. Lying is this paragon of truth and justice, even there's a background disagreements. Bounty hunters come after you if you have a high or low karma. I think people make the comparison to Enclave versus Lionhood and see evil versus good as the entire theme of the game. In the end though, the simple fact is there's more moralistic arguments presented in Enclave for 3 versus 2. It just doesn't go anywheres. But there was another argument to be made that was touched up on the prior issue. Humanization.
Welcome to Camp Navarro. So you're the new replacement. You are out of uniform, soldier! Where is your power armor?
Classic fans state that there's no humanization on the Enclave in Fallout 3, and I think there's a point here actually. However, I wouldn't say there's no humanization, just very, very little. Autumn has a moralistic identity, and President Zach's computer can be convinced to blow himself up, but that's it. The fact that there's only really 2 Enclave members that are noteworthy means that it's going to be a pretty limited scope for humanization. In comparison, there's plenty of interaction with Fallout 2 Enclave members. I mean, look at the fact that there's 5 talking heads for the Enclave in 2. And there's plenty more of text-only NPCs. Part of this is because they try to build up the Enclave before you storm the gates. From accidentally stumbling upon a massacre, to prank calling the Enclave, or getting yelled at by Sergeant Dornan. You can also come across guys like Dr. Henney or Ron Myers, who used to be Enclave members but chose a different path. And Navarro has plenty of NPCs to talk to you with humanized personalities, like Raul, who's a pretty rough mechanic, especially when it comes to Quincy, who is his longtime rival. These 2 mechanics just don't get along, butting heads, and honestly, it's pretty great to read. Arcade Gannon said it the best.
The Enclave did a lot of bad things, but there were good people in Navarro. Good people with a lot of experience.
If not good people, at least there were people in Navarro. So, did Bethesda ruin the Enclave? Well, there was no problem with them going eastward. There's more moral arguments to be made about Eden and Autumn. Honestly, the real biggest issue is that they're not really humanized. There's hints at it, but it's not fleshed out. Meanwhile, there's plenty in 2. I guess it depends whether you prefer humanized but black and white Enclave of 2, or gray but very shallow Enclave of 3. And I didn't touch on this earlier, but the Fallout 3 power armor is really ugly. I'm sorry, but it is. This Batman power armor really doesn't do it for me. I like the Hellfire design though. Anyway, I think ruin is a strong word, way too strong. They're boring, yes, but not ruin. The basic plot point of the Enclave is very similar to Fallout 2, so it seemed like a way to introduce them to new fans more than anything else. Not ruin, just very boring. And besides, it seemed like Bethesda decided to let New Vegas send them off with the remnants. As far as we know, they're finally retired, and that keeps them from ever being truly ruined.
But for now, my America, we must part. Restoring the greatest country in the world to its former glory, well, that takes time, even for the Enclave.